Good morning. My name is Michelle, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the Core Mining Limited Exploration Conference Call and Webcast. Today's presenters are Scott Trebilcock, Core's CEO, and James Hines, Core's Executive Chairman. The presentation today will be broken up into three parts with a question and answer session following each section. At that time, if you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. If you would like to withdraw your question, please press the pound key. With that, let me hand the call over to Scott Trebilcock. Please go ahead.
Thank you, operator. Hello to everyone on the phone. Thank you very much for taking some time to spend it with Core during all of our busy days during these interesting times. It's been very exciting times here at Core Mining over the last quarter and over 10 months now since I became CEO of the company. We're really happy to see some traction in the market and some excitement around Core Mining's great story. We thought we'd do something a little different for you today. You know, there's lots of webinars we've been putting and publishing on the internet, participating in lots of conferences and online forums. But in very few of those forums do we get a chance to really get into the exploration story at Core Mining. We talked a lot about the great PEA we put out recently, our Imperial Project in California. We get into some of the exploration upside. But you've seen as shareholders and potential shareholders of the company a great series of news releases we've been putting out since January of this year, espousing the benefits and potential value creation from these great projects. So today we're going to spend some time. We're going to try and keep it relatively casual. We're going to have a bit of a dialogue. We'd really like to get involved with all of you, both on the web and on the calls, to get in and into the Q&A and really mix it up, and let's talk about the great exploration opportunities we have here at Core Mining. As the operator mentioned, the agenda today will go through three main parts. We're actually going to try and coordinate three separate Q&A sessions. So the operator is going to be bouncing back and forth, and we'll be opening up the Q&A to live questions through three different parts of the presentation. After I get to my little preamble here, we'll talk about Imperial and the exploration story, followed by a Q&A, then Long Valley, and then our BC projects. In the final Q&A, we can bridge into talking about any element of exploration. But if you've got questions related to Imperial projects or general corporate questions, hold those and send us to us offline. We really want to focus today on exploration and generating value at Core Mining through pursuing exploration in parallel with development. I will be making forward-looking statements along with James on this call. I encourage all shareholders and potential shareholders to carefully review all of our disclosures available on SEDAR and our website. Some of you probably saw this morning we posted the technical report for the preliminary economic assessment at Imperial. That's a great supporting document that talks about a lot of the risk factors related to Core's key assets. You can also read our management information circulars and MD&As for more information. Okay, so getting into it. Core has a great opportunity in this market to build value by exploration. James and the other founder of the company, Adrian Rothwell, one of our directors, did an incredible job building a portfolio of assets in 2017-18, getting them public. We've gone through a period of capitalizing the company with strategic investments from Macquarie Bank and Mr. Eric Sprott's personal investment. They've now funded a total of, I think it's 10 million Canadian dollars to advance these projects. And I think we're in a great position today to spend the recent investment from those investors to advance even further and deliver more great news to our shareholders. Let's first talk about Imperial. Obviously, Imperial gets a lot of airtime at Core. We're not here to talk about the PEA, but I very much like the picture on this slide. It really shows the kind of terrain we're dealing with at Imperial. We're in flat northern Sonoran Desert, and Core has gone out and staked what historically was an incredible gold district in this part of California. The Mesquite mine to the northwest, the Picacho mine to the east, kind of pins in the middle the Imperial Project. All of those three deposits discovered by outcrop are connected by a large fault structure and trend that drives mineralization at those three deposits. Core has gone out and claimed the entire trend. So this is a super exciting exploration opportunity for Core, and we'll hear a bit in a little bit about some of the work we're going on that regional exploration play. We've also got some great opportunities in and around the Imperial deposit itself that we further defined with geophysics in a news release earlier this year. So to kick it off, talking a bit about rocks, I'm going to hand it over to James Hines, Exec Chair of the company, founder, and geologist leading the great exploration work at Imperial. Jim?
Yeah, thank you very much, Scott. And jumping right into the Imperial Project in the Imperial District, what's most important for us is that this is on the western edge of the Basin and Range province. So much like what you see in Nevada, some of the great trends and districts of Nevada and northern Mexico, this is what we see here in the Imperial Mesquite District. So why this is important to us and why this project to us is so exciting, especially on a district scale, is that we have a flat-lying mineralized gneiss that we're experiencing at both Imperial. It's being mined at Mesquite, and it was part of the main ore body at the Picacho mine until it became depleted. Why that's important is the mineralized gneiss, or the gneiss itself, is a great host rock for gold mineralization. They're all deposited by a hydrothermal system that is using the low-angle detachment faults and normal faults along this trend as their conduit for mineralization. This has then been modified by late-stage faulting, and that late-stage faulting has either been syn mineralizing, or it's been post-mineralizing to deform or alter the ore bodies. Moving on to the next page, we have, as you can see in this picture with the Picacho Peak in the background, this is taken from the Imperial deposit itself. You can see the alluvial cover, which is basically sand and gravels, as well as a Miocene basalt. Why that's important is that when you look at the district as a whole, the bulk of our trend is covered by this alluvium and basalt. And that buries the potential mineralization and leads us to opportunities to find undiscovered deposits. Moving on to the next page on mineralization and what controls mineralization, I spoke about this a bit, but what's important to note here is that the biotite gneiss, which is a Oligocene-aged host rock, is typically bounded by mineralized faults. And these faults are, again, the hydrothermal conduits for mineralization. They're part of a sort of a complex metamorphic alteration in the region. And we have this footwall area which was formed by post-mineral fault displacement. So current low-angle detachment faults that we see as Imperial as an example is a reactivation of thrust faults in the region. On the next slide, we have the visual character of mineralization at Imperial. And if you look at the red color rock that you see in the chip tray, these are chips from RC drilling on the project. You see that the orange rock is where the mineralization occurs, and that's due to the abundant limonites and hematites that have been essentially oxidized over time, and it's a great way to see where the ore is in the ore body. Our next slide is on faulting at the at the Imperial Project. Why this is important for us and for future exploration as Imperial is a lot of the past drilling was vertical or near vertical and quite shallow. And the structure of the deposit is not well understood. And so we have opportunities where portions of the deposit may have been faulted or moved, where we can find more and add to the size and characteristic of the Imperial deposit. I'm going to hand it back to Scott here.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm just going to walk through, so with that geologic background, one of the first things we did in order to better understand the exploration opportunities was we ran IP geophysics over the intact Imperial deposit. We saw a news release come out on that in January, and these are some of the sections available on our website that you can see resulting from that work. And these sections are great at showing, what the original operator, Glamis, was facing drilling the resource versus what we see today with the benefit of all that information. If you look on the left side of the slide, you can see the vertical RC drilling following that purple rock, which is the gneiss that Jim was talking about, down plunge, down plunge, down plunge, until they eventually stepped out at the depths they were looking for, and they would step along strike and keep drilling. And really, they were using that, conglomerate underneath that gneiss on the thrush fault as the marker for stopping drilling. So it was a very, very simple way of drilling out this ore body, but it also has left a lot of opportunities on the table for core. So particularly in this case, you can see there's the down plunge opportunity, and I think we would like to go down for sure and test that, certainly on whether that's swelling and what kind of grades exist on that at the bottom, because as we see, this deposit was sheared off from something and is now lying on top of these younger conglomerates. Now what the geophysics revealed, and you can see this on the right, is we have this we can see where the mineralized material is. So that's great, because that's a great marker we can use on the regional exploration we'll see in a moment. But we also see this untested geophysical anomaly that underlies the Imperial deposit, and that's something that in the future drilling, hopefully later this fall, we want to get and run some confirmatory drill holes through the existing resource and down and make sure we're testing that geophysical anomaly, because you can see in the little middle chart, that geophysical anomaly represented by the red line actually goes the full extent of the ore bodies and continues on strike in both directions from the ore bodies, and is a really exciting opportunity for core to find some more mineralization. Stepping through the sections, you see a very similar story. I think in this section, the interesting part is also the continuation of that anomaly under the thrust fault. But we also see in this case there's been some vertical faults that are moving around the gneiss and the mineralization, and this has left some opportunities open for exploration. For instance, it looks like there could be a down-dropped block below the depth of current drilling between the east and west pits. So right where this section is running through. So that is a very interesting drill target for us to follow up in a future drill program. Sort of continuing to step along the sections, again, you see the continuity of that geophysical anomaly, additional untested drill targets. And when you take that onto a plan, we've got drill targets on strike in the geophysics anomaly, and step outs and looking for some of the faulted structures on the existing resource. So great opportunities in and around the deposit, validated by existing drilling and as well by the geophysics. Now stepping out to the region, we then took those IP geophysics signatures that we saw at Imperial and an understanding of the geology, as we talked about, Jim talked about earlier, and now we go look out on this great exploration package we have heading out towards Mesquite. You'll see that about probably 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago now, we put out a news release with the first results from IP geophysics lines on that regional exploration ground. Super exciting, is kind of validated what we thought was out there, but really, hones in our minds where we need to focus a lot of energy. The geophysics identified where it looks like there is additional fault structures and quite continuous fault structures heading up towards the Mesquite series of deposits. They're undercover, so they're blind, and the drill bit will tell whether they're mineralized, but this is a super exciting opportunity. Core is going to focus first on the Mesquite east of these targets. There's great near surface faulting, so we're going to see what that looks like, as well as permitting some drill pads in and around Imperial to test the Imperial east and west targets on strike, because we want to make sure we have our deposit fully explored and understood as we head into and through the permitting process, because we want to make sure that we have the right mine plan in place when we had pushed the mine into production. So great opportunities both in the mine and regionally. Don't forget, this does not include any work yet on the eastern half of our regional exploration ground. There's another similar strike length that goes out towards Picacho. We haven't even touched that ground yet. We've got years of opportunities to follow up on this block alone. So again, great opportunity for Core to make new discoveries and generate value for shareholders. At this point, I'd like to hand it back over to the operator for questions.
All right. If anybody would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. That would be star 1 on your telephone keypad. While we wait for questions to come in, I'll hand the call over to Arlen Hansen to ask questions that were previously sent in.
Yeah, Scott, Arlen here. Had some questions from shareholders I thought I'd just kind of kick off with. Has there really been any much exploration between the Mesquite and the Imperial deposit, and why hasn't there been if there hasn't been?
Yeah, that's a great question, Arlen. Now, I think that the key point is that Mesquite, Imperial, and Picacho all had an element of outcrop. So they were really following outcropped mineralization as it dove down under that cover. Mesquite then found several satellites that undercover that weren't found when the original mine was put in production, and continued to step out and make new discoveries, effectively following the same trend we plan to follow from our deposit up towards theirs. So really there was no strong motivation for the operators at that time to spend a lot of time looking undercover. So there really has been almost zero exploration between these three deposits. However, it's important to note that Goldfields and Newmont had this whole area staked up in the 80s and through the 90s. So I think there was keen interest from large companies looking for additional Mesquite scale deposits in this belt. So it truly is a district opportunity that was previously owned by majors. Jim, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, that pretty much covers it off, Scott.
And then you said one of your higher priority targets is Mesquite East. Why there versus maybe some of your near targets to the deposit, like the Olga target?
Jim, you can take that one.
Sure. When we did the geophysics this winter, one of the things that was quite apparent was proximity to surface. The Mesquite East deposit is very near surface, as the geophysics suggests, allowing us to do some early stage drilling that's quite shallow, where we can start to feel out some of these targets. And as we compress between, keep extending out Imperial and working back from Mesquite East, then we'll start to investigate the Ogilvy target.
And I'm guessing first pass will all be RC and shallow.
Yeah, the idea would be keep it as inexpensive as possible. So likely RC with a follow up with some larger diameter core drilling.
Yeah, and then can you talk about what your near resource exploration targets would be, like drilling at depth in the existing resource or stepping out from the existing resource? Is there much opportunity there? I guess Scott handled that a little bit in the PowerPoint, but just a better understanding of the very near resource exploration.
Yeah, as Scott mentioned, there's a younger conglomerate underneath the current deposit. And so understanding the thickness of that conglomerate, whether there's a mineralized ore body sitting directly below that, is part of our sort of blue sky opportunity on Imperial. Not only that, we're seeing some geophysical targets north of the deposit, and those could be essentially similar type conduits as we see with the thrust fault, but more near vertical faulting. So I think it's a combination of extending this down dip on strike, but also below the current deposit, and the opportunity to really expand the size of the resource is quite huge on this project.
Okay, and then just I guess the last one before I let go live is what's the process to start turning the drill bits there?
I'll let Scott answer that one.
Yeah, so we're currently in discussions with the Bureau of Land Management. Our first proposal will be a notice of intent with a, under 5 acre disturbance. We can permit a number of drill pads off existing BLM road infrastructure and accomplish some of our objectives, and that'll allow us a reasonable fast track to drill pads and drilling, and we'd like to be out drilling in fall.
Okay. Operator, can you go to any other live questions if there are any?
I do have one question from Chris Thompson from PI Financial. Your line is open.
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for hosting this call. Just a couple of quick questions here. I wonder if you could just talk to where does the oxide transition, or is there a sulfide component to this as you drill down? But where does that sit?
Jim, you can take that.
Sure. Yeah, thank you very much for your question, and thanks for joining the webinar here. Essentially, Imperial to date hasn't seen any sulfide in drill cuttings, and so far our understanding is this is completely oxidized and open at depth. And part of our future investigation is to find out if where that contact is, where the transition ore may be, and if some of the targets that we're seeing in geophysics are sort of remnant sulfides in terms of sort of that transitional point between oxide and sulfide. So to answer your question, no sulfides on the Imperial deposit, unlike at Mesquite. And so I think we're likely to see a combination of the two across the deposit or across the district. And it's really a function of proximity to these fault structures themselves. The closer you are to a fault structure or part of a fault structure, the more oxidized it's going to be because it continues to be a good conduit for oxidation post-mineralization.
Thanks, Jim. And then I'm just intrigued by this IP anomaly, I guess. Is this in the basal conglomerates?
It's quite likely that is below the conglomerates. If the conglomerates are resting unconformably on the gneiss below it. So it's possible that our ore body is a thrusted gneiss over top of the younger conglomerates, and we could be seeing a mineralization below that conglomerate where it could either be a basal unit of the conglomerate itself or actually the gneiss that we're seeing as the main ore body.
Okay. Is there a similar sort of profile at Mesquite on this? I mean, there's any work? Obviously, you guys haven't done the work, but I mean, can you get your hands on any sort of geophysics over the Mesquite project? I mean, I'm looking for an analog here.
And nothing on the geophysics, but certainly on the geology, the analog would be the biotite gneiss is a perfect host rock at both deposits. And proximity to any sort of syn mineral or pre-mineralized faulting is the key for higher grades. So really it's chasing the opportunities of proximity to these large thrust faults or vertical faults and expanding on disseminated gold around those or halos around those. And so we'll continue to do that. And it's possible that localized folding could play a bit of a role as well in terms of higher grade, again, proximal to some of these vertical faults.
All right, and thanks for that, Jim. And the final question, I guess, is homing in on some of these high-angled faults. I guess the southwest, northeast sort of trending faults here. Are any of those manifest themselves within the east or the west pits?
Nothing that we've been able to ascertain from previous drilling. Although the caveat on that is the past drilling was vertical RC with just a few HQ and PQ cores for metallurgy. And so really one of our first objectives with drilling the Imperial deposit is getting a better understanding of that structure and any fault structures that may occur. But I think one of the upsides within even the drilled deposit itself is that these high-angle faults could be hosting the higher-grade mineralization. And if we have that within our own deposit, we're likely to see more of that reveal itself with angle drilling as opposed to historic vertical drilling.
Yeah, I guess that's what I was getting at, is maybe just, unpacking some of these structural controls and then maybe homing in on some high grade within what you already have.
Yeah, and absolutely. There are indications of that in some of the chip samples and assay results of some of the holes. We have some high-grade sort of hits that are worth following up on, proximal to some of the pads that we've been working towards permitting.
Great. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome.
I have
Okay,
no
operator,
further
yeah, great.
I have no further questions in queue. I'll turn it back over to Scott to move on.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll keep the presentation part as short as possible given the robust Q&A. So let's go quickly into Long Valley here. Again, I love the cover picture. This is cattle ranching ground in U.S. Forest Service land in Mono County, California. This is our Long Valley project. I think this has been described to me, and I've been out in the field with one of our field geologists, a bit of a geologist's dream project. It's got amazing geology, almost to the textbook of an intact epithermal deposit. And on that, why don't we just jump right into the geology, and Jim can walk you through a quick run on the geology. We'll talk a bit about the targets we've generated, and let's get into the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Scott. Much like Imperial, the Long Valley deposit was primarily drilled with RC drilling in the 80s and 90s. Shallow drilling that's also quite well spaced. But what we found is that looking through the historical information, we have a great low sulfidation epithermal deposit. There's clearly all the markers of a at surface epithermal that really presents itself as completely intact. And by that I mean we have opal, sinter at surface, widespread chalcedony, lots of silicification, and we see that well beyond even the current drilled area and resource. And why this is important is twofold. We find that the deposit itself is open in all directions for adding to the oxide resource. But what's most important is that we have all the trace element markers that extend well outside the known drilling and the known resource, which could allow us to find much more of the same. So this mineralization and alteration crops out over a strike length of 6 kilometers along what's called the Hilton Creek Fault. And there's a series of sort of splays or other controlling structures that come off of that main fault. Moving on to the next page, and when Scott mentioned textbook epithermal, this gives you a really good example in a diagram of what an intact epithermal deposit looks like. Typically, you'll have very low-grade or low-grade precious metals at surface, along with markers such as arsenic, antimony, and mercury. And as you actually get closer to the feeder structure or boiling zone of a deposit like this, typically where things start to tighten up, you have more quartz veining or intense quartz veining, and that's where your high-grade or bonanza grades could occur. So when we look at the Long Valley deposit, we think we're just scratching the surface of what this project could be. We see widespread gold mineralization over kilometers. It has that scale and footprint of something that can be quite large. And right now we feel the 1.8 million ounces of the current deposit are essentially just the smoke of what could be a much larger and bigger project. And when you add in the fact that no drilling has really occurred below a depth of around 85 meters, the bulk of the drilling has been quite shallow, we're left with an exploration model and our opportunity to drill still quite shallow, but target some of these high-grade structures that could occur just below our current deposit. Moving on to the next page, just a quick pointing out on soil and rock geochemistry and how effective it is on our deposit. Just a quick reconnaissance survey from this fall led to good alteration mapping, good geochemical work, and really allowing us to vector in along with our geophysics on where our targets are on this project. And the next page, where our oxide growth targets are. I mentioned that we have a project that's open in quite a few directions for adding to the oxide. What's great is that our geophysics, our IP and resistivity survey, we're very effective in pointing out where those targets could be. We have a really good chargeability low that's coincident with our deposit itself, indicating that finding more low chargeability areas are likely to find more oxide targets or oxide ore. And also at depth, we have a feeder structure target, which you'll see on the next page, which is effectively a resistivity high amongst a very low resistive host rock. And we feel that because it's proximal to our current shallow at-surface deposit, this is a true bullseye type target for us, where we can drill through our known oxide deposits and target some of these deeper opportunistic feeder structures. And I'm going to stop there and hand it over to questions.
If anybody has a question, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Again, that would be star 1 on your telephone keypad. While we wait for questions, I turn it back over to Arlen to answer some questions that were previously sent in.
Just very quickly on one, it says that silver has never been assayed on Long Valley here. Do we have any evidence from core logs or anything geologically that suggests that this is present?
Yeah, that's a good question, Arlen. And to answer that, there was very few assays done historically that were assayed for both gold and silver. The targets at the time were very much gold-based. But we've seen from both historic metallurgy and also some of the assays that were done as multi-element that there is a significant silver component to this deposit. And we're going to use that as an opportunity to add to sort of the gold equivalent of this deposit as we drill it, advance it, and make it bigger. Because obviously adding more precious metals that could be extracted or added in a resource model just add to the economics of the project.
Okay, operator, that's all I had.
Okay, as in the essence of time, I'm going to turn the call back over to Scott to move on.
Okay, thank you very much, operator. And now moving on to British Columbia. We're up in the Caribou region of BC around the town of Williams Lake. We've got 2 road-accessible, 100% owned gold projects. Both projects are surrounded with large land packages that allow us to explore these projects and fully control them. And we're very excited to be out drilling FG gold at the moment. I will brief you for a couple secs first on Gold Creek. We don't want to let it get completely lost in our portfolio. It is regionally proximal to FG Gold, low elevation, road accessible exploration with an early stage gold recovery. So we've got a 20,000 acre claim block. It's just a little to the northwest of Spanish Mountains claim block, and there I think it's 4 to 5 million ounce resource they've got just over on the other side of the ridge. It's in a very good mining jurisdiction. There is the Mount Poly mine, the Gibraltar mine. Cisco's got the Barkerville camp up in this area. So this is a great place to make a gold discovery and potentially put something into production. So Core put holes into this project in 2018 to follow up on a discovery, encountered some great mineralized intercepts, and really they were following this large 8-kilometer soil anomaly that traces across our project and trends down towards Spanish Mountain. Begs the question: Are the mineralized systems related? There's a Greywacke unit that comes up near surface on our project that's also been identified in the deeper mineralization at Spanish Mountain. But suffice it to say, we've got an early stage gold discovery here. We've got some good near surface intercepts, from right at surface down to 150 to 200 meters. So there's some good length. And it's a project we would like to follow up at the appropriate time and cost of capital. We'll leave this one for some questions at the end and move on to FG Gold. We've seen a lot of excitement around FG Gold. We put out a news release yesterday with the initial result from the top of the first hole. We've completed 8 holes at the project before pausing for the winter breakup. And what we're chasing is the potential to open up a project to a brand new generation of exploration. We control almost 30,000 acres of claims here over a 20-kilometer prospective trend identified by the orange and red in the background. We've broken that into multiple exploration regions simply to break the project into bite-sized chunks. One of the chunks, the main zone, hosts the current 380,000 ounce M&I resource and the 640,000 ounce inferred resource. That mineralization was drilled in the 90s and 2000s by previous operators. I'll hand it over to Jim to talk about the regional geology and walk us through to the end of the core coming out of the ground at the project today.
Very good. Thank you, Scott. So quickly to walk through the geology of the FG deposit, we're sitting as part of the Quesnel terrain. This is the same terrain that hosts a series of porphyry deposits and gold deposits running all the way up through central British Columbia. What's important is we're located proximal to the Eureka Thrust. Eureka Thrust essentially separates the Quesnel terrain from the next terrain up, which effectively hosts the Barkerville deposits. We're essentially in an orogenic gold environment. Our main zone is hosted in quartz veins within knotted phyllites. Primarily, mineralization occurs within veining and sulfide mineralization that is in sort of the upper contact of the knotted phyllite with a lower basal unit that's a graphitic unit. Additionally, we have a alkalic copper porphyry target referred to as our Nova Zone. We've done a bit of reconnaissance work there over the last year, collecting samples, doing some mapping, and we see some great opportunity with that and how it relates to the mineralization on the project as a whole. Moving on to the next slide gives us a bit of a snapshot through the project that we have through our property, and it shows that we're part of a localized or regional syncline, and that syncline, as you can see, our knotted phyllite unit daylights on the right side of your screen, but also on the left-hand side of your screen. So the two limbs of that knotted phyllite unit, which hosts our gold mineralization, not only comes to surface on both sides of our property, but also the nose of that syncline comes to surface in the southeast corner of our property as well. Creates lots of opportunities for exploration and lots of drill targets that we can follow up here in the near future. When you look at our next slide, the higher grade potential of FG is something that we're really focused on right now. We have a lot of sort of low grade mineralization disseminated in the deposit, but within that we have higher grade structures that we're working as a company to better understand. And this could be a combination of stratigraphic, chemical, or structural controls that lead to us finding these nice bands or zones of high grade. And when we move on to the next slide here, which is our first results from the project, what we're endeavoring to do here in and you'll see that in this cross section, is sort of sliced through the known mineralization that we have on the deposit, using oriented core to better understand the structural controls of the deposit, but also work to probe further down dip on what this project could hold and how the mineralization and grade tie together. And we're still awaiting assays from the rest of our first hole that we put out, and also from the next 7. But so far, in terms of drill core and core recovery, we're certainly really liking what we see. And if you have a look at the next slide, you see some instances of visible gold that we have from our project. A lot of this visible gold is contained either in the margins of our quartz veining with the knotted phyllite, or in the sort of brecciated quartz veining that we see, indication of good hydrothermal or fluid flow in the deposit, indicative of a good deposit that remobilizes gold and creates some high-grade opportunities. I'm just going to hand it over to Scott, where we can take some final questions and go over next steps.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. I think that was a really good description of the opportunities we have at FG Gold and why we're drilling. I think we should also mention we have the Nova Zone porphyry on the property as well. Just more evidence of the great mineralizing system driving the gold on this project. As we announced, we're planning to continue drilling after the June 15 breakup. We're still waiting to get the assays and metallic screens from the 7.5 holes. We plan to follow that up with soils and geophysics on the southwest limb, which is the extension of this trend going sort of around the horseshoe of the syncline, and hopefully open up the project for another phase of drilling in 2021. So with that, let me hand it over to the operator for our final question and answer session. Feel free to ask questions about FG Gold or any other subject related to exploration at Core. Dial in.
Yeah, Scott, Arlen here. I'll just jump in while that queue's lining up here. Can you just talk about how much of the previous drilling was fire assaying versus metallic mesh assaying, and kind of differentiate the two, and what you're hoping to achieve with metallic mesh assaying?
Sure, Arlen, and that's a good question. So this project was discovered in the 1980s by John Kerr. He, in the early stage of Eureka Resources, the previous owner and operator of this deposit, made the discovery, drilled the project initially with fairly narrow NQ core, worked up to some RC drilling, some HQ drilling, a combination of typical fire assay, and then ultimately some metallic screen assays. And then eventually they did some underground bulk sampling of the deposit itself. And as you can see through the progression of the drilling of the deposit, and recognize that all those previous holes are what creates the resource that is FG Gold right now, is what we see early on in our work is that the metallic screen is showing that there's a base low-grade disseminated gold in a mineralized host rock. There's lots of coarse gold that is quite abundant in those discrete mineralized zones. And the more metallic screens that we do, metallic screen, for anyone that's not familiar, it's taking a much larger sample, crushing, grinding, and then screening the coarse fraction to discretely assay the coarse gold that might be in a sample assay, and then also assaying the fine material as well, and effectively consolidating the two into an average grade based on its weighted average. And what it's shown us so far is that we have lots of coarse gold, sometimes 5-10 times as much coarse gold as fine gold. And the more metallic screens that we do, the more representative it is of the deposit, but also shows that past fire assaying might have underestimated overall the grade of the deposit. So it creates a big upside for us as a company of being more in tune with the deposit itself and having a QA/QC protocol that really advances those higher grade zones within our deposit.
And then I'll ask that question again. Are we seeing any other metals in here? Like I just saw you reported just gold. Are there any potential for silver in this deposit as well?
There is silver as well. It's again, much like other deposits, it wasn't well deposits that we have. It wasn't well assayed for because of the period of time and low silver prices. So it's certainly an upside opportunity for this project as well. But because of the high grade nature of some of the gold, the gold will definitely be the driver on this. But as Scott mentioned, the Nova Gold porphyry or Nova Zone porphyry is quite interesting for us in that there seems to be a big heat source in the middle of this project, and there are some historic drilling zones like our Bowl Zone that are definitely hydrothermally altered, very likely related to that Nova Zone porphyry. And so we could be seeing gold and silver or copper on this project in discrete zones from the valley area where we are with the main zone drilling right through up to the upper elevation cirques where the copper and gold mineralization occurs.
Okay, thank you, operator. That's all I have.
Okay, we do have a question from Chris Thompson from PI Financial. Your line is open.
Yeah, sorry guys. This question actually was for Long Canyon. Sorry, not Long Canyon, Long Valley. Obviously, there's potential for, I would imagine, for growing this resource via obviously tapping into high grade as well as additional tons. Where do you see? I mean, if you were to sort of look for one or the other, where does most of the opportunity? What I guess. Is it a bit of both, or do you think there's a potential for higher grade over more tons here?
That's a really good question, Chris. And it is a two-part question, and it's a two-part answer. This deposit has the potential to just keep expanding at surface, low to moderate grade oxide. And I think, based on where this is open and where the opportunities we see, the ability to double the size of this resource is clearly there in the oxide. But where we get really excited about the blue sky opportunity here is grade and tons. And if we can find high grade within these feeder zones, it doesn't take very much drilling and it doesn't take very much tonnage to add a lot of value to this project, especially given the fact that these feeder zones are still shallow on a relative basis to many of the other projects that we see reporting results these days. We're still targeting 200 meters, 150 up to 300 meters below surface. These are still very shallow targets, but targeting high grade at the same time.
Okay, and then I guess just a side question on that. I mean, you've got 1.7, correct me if I'm wrong, but million in situ ounces already here. I mean, this is already looks like a sizable deposit. It wouldn't. I mean, if you were to sort of bump that up significantly over 2, I would imagine you'd think about sort of pushing Long Valley along the permitting track. I wonder if you could just sort of, would that be the same sort of process to what's being applied at Imperial at the moment? How do the two compare from a permitting perspective?
That's a good question.
Another good question,
Chris.
Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah. I mean, look, you can hear Jim's opinion as well. My view is, I think there's about 1 million ounces of oxide. And again, we're looking at, better defining that oxide transition area in the deposit. So about 1 million ounces of oxide. Be nice to get that to, something closer to 2 before we, propose a project to any kind of stakeholders. That said, I think you're absolutely right. The project is of a scale we could do a PEA on it that would probably look fantastic right now. I think it's really a question of, I think right now I'd prefer to see us drill out more oxide resources and grow the oxide component and give us a chance to test some of these great sulfides. Any other comment, Jim?
I think the only other comment would be, Our strategy as a company is to bring baseline studies forward and stakeholder engagement as we progress these deposits and projects. So we're not afraid to start that baseline work that could lead to permitting in the future, and we'll be looking to do that across the board on our projects.
Great. Thanks, guys.
I have no further questions. Thank you. I turn the call back over to Scott for closing remarks.
Yes, thank you very much, operator. Well, thank you to everybody for taking some time to hear more about CORE's great exploration opportunities. I think I'd like to leave with a couple comments. CORE is well funded by our strategic investors, Mr. Eric Sprott and Macquarie Bank, to advance a variety of these exploration opportunities you've heard about today in the near future. We're permitting or have permits drilling across our portfolio. So we've got lots of opportunities to get and keep drills turning in the company, and we're very excited about the opportunities, as you've heard today, across the portfolio. We don't want any assets to get lost in the mix at this point in the company's development. I think we've been very diligent about deploying capital. We've kept all of our exploration programs on very tight budgets. I think we've delivered some great news flow, and with the drills starting to turn at FG and heading into the other projects through the back half of this year, I'd look out for a lot of exciting news flow from CORE going forward. Very happy to have stakeholders, investors, and potential investors on the line. Thank you very much for listening, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. This will conclude today's conference call. You may now disconnect.